Welcome, everyone, to the official City Council meeting. Today is Monday, October 19th. I would ask us everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And at this time, I would like to entertain any written communications or petitions from the public. Or excuse me, I need to establish a quorum. I ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Gutenkopf.
Here.
Hessa.
Here.
Shea.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Hipskin.
Here.
York.
Here.
Nybo.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Morley.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
14 present, 0 absent.
Thank you, Patty. 14 present, 0 present. We have an official quorum. At this time, I'd ask if there are any written communications and or petitions from the public. If there are, if you could please bring those up and hand deliver them to our clerk, Patty Spencer, up here on my right. Any written communications or petitions at this time, if you could please bring those up and present them to our city clerk, please. Thank you.
See that they get copied and distributed.
Thank you, sir. And now I will go to the open to public forum portion of our meeting, where anyone from Elmhurst can talk about anything related to Elmhurst. If you would like to speak, you would have 3 minutes. I would ask that you raise your hand, and when I call upon you, if you could please state your name and your address, and then you'll have 3 minutes to speak. This gentleman, raise your hand. The gentleman up here on the right. Go ahead. You, sir. Sure.
Gilbert Fisher, 586 North Van Alken Street. I received my electric bill, and it was for $50.32. I noticed that there was a state tax of $1.24 and a city tax of $2.11. I am not aware of all the taxes that the city of Elmhurst has put upon the citizens of Elmhurst. I am requesting a copy of all taxes that the city of Elmhurst has on the people of Elmhurst. There's a lot of rumors going around. They say if you go to the show, you have to pay an extra tax on the ticket to the city of Elmhurst. If you go to dinner in Elmhurst, there's a special tax to the people of the city of Elmhurst that you pay. I've even been told that if you move out of Elmhurst, you have to pay a tax to the city of Elmhurst for moving out of Elmhurst. I don't know if this is true or not. What I would like to have is a copy of all taxes that the city of Elmhurst is collecting from the citizens of Elmhurst. And I think it should be in the newspapers. You need more money, you want higher taxes, news taxes. I, for one, don't know what taxes I'm paying. I am requesting a copy of all taxes that I am paying to the city of Elmhurst, and I think all the people of Elmhurst should know this. I think it should be printed in the newspapers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? This woman, Mrs. Braun?
My name is Ellen Braun. I live at 850 Euclid in Elmhurst. I am the secretary of the Elmhurst Heritage Foundation, and I'd like to comment tonight on some of the cuts that have been proposed by the task force to the museum's budget. I'm concerned that these cuts in funding are going to affect the quality of the programs and exhibits that the museum can offer. I believe that the Historical Museum is an important part of the Elmhurst community. The museum preserves the heritage of our city. It provides educational opportunities for children and adults. The Historical Museum collects the artifacts that help define our lives today. It attracts visitors to the city and enhances our reputation as a special place to live and work. And I've been at the museum as a volunteer when people have come in from Tennessee and Wisconsin and places all over the Chicago area to take advantage of what we have to offer. And they're always impressed by the quality of the experience. 2 years ago, the Historical Museum celebrated its 50th anniversary. At that time, the foundation that supports the museum was enlarged and reorganized as the Elmhurst Heritage Foundation. In the past 2 years, the foundation has sponsored special events such as a jazz brunch and exhibit receptions to generate interest in the museum. More than 400 people came to meet Spider-Man at a celebration for the opening of the comic book exhibit that was held this last summer. Over 100 children came each week to participate in craft activities during the summer as part of the comic book exhibit as well. We know these events have brought people into the museum who have never been there before. Through the efforts of the Heritage Foundation board members, a volunteer program was expanded so that volunteers can assist the museum staff on weekends and with programs for children and adults. The foundation also paid 1/3 of the salary of the development director. The Heritage Foundation recently agreed to contribute $18,553 to complete the renovation of the one-room schoolhouse. We are now planning a fundraising event on November 7th to raise funds that we hope will provide an educational program to be pursued at the one-room schoolhouse. Plans for other fundraising projects include a donor campaign and hopefully a membership program in the near future. We hope that the community will continue to support these fundraising efforts so that the foundation can work to enhance museum programs and to supplement the funding provided by the city. We are doing a lot what we can as volunteers, but we also depend upon the professional staff to create the programs and carry out the exhibits and that attract people to the museum. We want to make sure that the museum staff has the resources that they need to continue to do their jobs well. The Heritage Foundation recently approved changes in the cooperation agreement with the city to allow for more flexibility in the types of things we are able to fund. We hope that the Heritage Foundation can continue to work with the city to meet the budget challenges so that the Historical Museum can continue to play a vital role in our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Braun. Anybody else for public comment? The gentleman here?
My name is James Sanchez. I'm a resident of 248 North Addison here in Elmhurst. First, I'd like to thank my Alderman Diane Gudenkoff for her referral to the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee regarding the issue of solar initiatives. Now, with the advent of recent legislation here in Illinois, there are now ways that cities can help property owners use renewable energy sources. As an instructor of photovoltaics for the IBEW, this is something I'm very involved with and very much interested in. This legislation will remove a major barrier for the installation of residential and commercial photovoltaic systems. It will create revenue for the city and opportunities in many service areas while greatly improving the environment. As a result, this will be an important component in bettering our community. The more property owners that convert to renewable energy sources, the more Elmhurst can reduce its impact on energy usage from the utility, and at the same time reduce our carbon footprint from CO2 emissions. I look forward to all the meetings with the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? This gentleman in the aisle there with the orange and blue?
John Pesic, 1026 Riverside Drive. This is in reference to case number 09P-05, the Sloan CE Rentals conditional use. As you are aware, this case has been brought before you in one form or another for many years now. The residents on Riverside Drive have been opposed to the expansion of this commercial interest into residential due to many reasons, which are all on the record. Some of the reasons for allowing this expansion that have been brought up lately in the committee and commission meetings need to be commented on. One of the reasons for has been since we have Route 83 traffic noise, the rental company noise should be of no extra concern. The traffic noise on Route 83 is a low hum, and it is not annoying at all. Route 83 is at least 100 yards away. Contrast this with the hammering of metal buckets and backhoes being run at 6:45 a.m., and it's dramatically different. They're only 90 feet from my bedroom window. Let's recall this is a rental business and not just a dealer of heavy equipment. This means the equipment is being moved constantly in and out, serviced and cleaned daily. We've also heard that several of the aldermen have stopped by during the day and heard no noise. That could be because all of the equipment is out on the street. You need to be there at 6:45 a.m. and also 2 to 3 p.m. Also, it's been said that the neighbors do not want to compromise. I've got absolutely nothing against Mr. Sloan. I do believe he's trying to run a neighborhood-friendly business. Unfortunately, it's a very noisy and pollution-intensive business. As I've said all along, if this were a dentist office parking lot, I would have no problem with that. We did oppose the granting of the parking lot directly to the north of this parcel. The reason we're trying to fight this, as we did the other expansion, is the slippery slope this creates. We're afraid that if this passes, they'll be trying to get all their heavy equipment onto this parcel. And for the record, CE Rentals sued the city over this issue and lost. And in Judge Popejoy's summary judgment, he did cite several precedents in the state of Illinois where commercial interests were not allowed to encroach into residential. I know this may seem like a trivial matter. After all, it's just a tiny parcel of land on the corner of town and doesn't affect many people at all, but it is detrimental to our health, comfort, and general welfare, as referenced in the conditional use application, page 2, section A. We ask that you seriously consider all the facts in this case before you vote. Respectively submitted, John Pesic.
Thank you, sir. This gentleman here with his hand up, with the plaid shirt.
My name is Bob Lamke, Lambke, 1012 South Riverside Drive. Tonight, DP&Z is going to present their report on the Sloan conditional use permit for a parking lot. They're going to make their recommendations. Nothing's really changed that he's asked for, other than now he's saying he doesn't want to bring his motorized equipment in there. He wants to store equipment and trailers, and I think there's 5 parking spaces. He's made no provisions in his request for any ingress and egress to the parking lot that he's proposing. So in order for his people, when they come in at 7 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning, for them to get into this new parking lot, they're going to have to start up all his equipment and move it out of the way, move their cars back into the parking lot. And if they're going to start at 7, I imagine he's going to want his people all parked before 7. So now the noise is going to start earlier. And then same thing when they leave at night. He's going to move the stuff back in order for them to get their cars out, or if they want to go for lunch, they're going to have to move all the equipment again. The property doesn't have sufficient space for ingress and egress. He's made no provision for it. So I hope if it comes to a vote tonight, or whenever you do vote, that you vote it down because of the noise and all the pollution that he creates. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else for public comment? Seeing none, I will now close the public forum portion of our meeting and go to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent agenda. And I would ask the City Council at this point, is there any item on the consent agenda that you would have a question on, or possibly vote no on, that you would wish to have removed from the consent agenda? Anybody? Okay, hearing none. I'd ask clerk, ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda as is. Alderman Healy, Alderman Hipskin seconds the motion. I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Healy.
Aye.
Hipskin.
Aye.
Gutenkopf.
Aye.
Pezza.
Aye.
Shea.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Bram.
Aye.
York.
Aye.
Nybo.
Aye.
Morley.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
Wagner.
Aye.
14 ayes, 0 nays.
14 ayes, 0 nays. The consent agenda is approved as in entirety. We will now go to the next item on the agenda, which is committee reports. Item 6A. I'd ask Clerk Spencer to read the report, please.
It's case number 09P-05, Sloan, CE Rentals, 1021 South Route 83, conditional use. The committee reviewed the standards for conditional use and concurred that the standards are met for this request. Therefore, it is the recommendation of the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee to recommend approval for this conditional use request. Respectfully submitted, Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee, signed by Stephen Morley, Chairman, and Norm Leader, Alderman, 2nd Ward, unsigned by Susan J. Rose, Vice Chairman.
All righty. And I'd ask for a motion and a second to put this report on the floor, please. Alderman Morley and Alderman Leader with a second and discussion. Alderman Morley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an application from CE Rentals
for the purpose of establishing a parking lot on an R2 single-family residential property immediately east of an abutting C3 property with an address of 1021 South Route 83. This is kind of a unique situation. What we're faced with, and everyone should have a copy of the map in their packet. What happened was, prior to the homes being there and prior to the development of the homes on the west side of Riverside Drive abutting this property, there was a C3 general commercial district located there, which is where Mr. Sloan's property, Mr. Sloan's business, CE Rentals, is located. After that business was established and after the C3 business district or commercial district was established, subsequent to that, a developer came along and divided up the lots, which are now the existing residential lots that abut this property. And in doing so, he created 4 roughly equal-sized lots. And when he, in effect, squared off the back of these lots, he left 2 odd parcels of land, which he turned around and he sold to the 2 commercial properties next to him. At the time, the city's recommendation was that those should be rezoned commercial districts. That didn't happen, but both of the business owners did purchase the property with them in the existing R2 designation. Now, this application specifically is for a conditional use, technically a conditional use for a parking lot, which is permitted in R2. Basically, what you have here is the CE Rentals, which rents construction equipment, and I don't think there's been any dispute that it's a noisy business, it's a messy business, but after reviewing literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of testimony from the Zoning and Planning Commission, all of the complaints, without exception from the most recent Zoning and Planning Commission hearing, were with the issue of the commercial business that was run on the commercial site. In the property that is in question, there was no commercial activity being run, and all of the commercial or business activity that is currently run on this man's property is permitted use in C3. So while I can certainly sympathize with the residents who abut this property, the fact of the matter is that the noise that is created by this business is permitted within the zoning allowed. Now, there is a landlocked piece of R2 district that was created after the development of these properties and subsequently sold. The only way to access this property is through Mr. Sloan's business. Right now, it's kind of a wasteland. It's a gravel parking lot full of weeds. Mr. Sloan has done what I consider an excellent job creating a barrier. Anytime you have commercial districts that back up to residential districts, you're going to have certainly competing interests, to put it in maybe in a PC manner. But I believe Mr. Sloan has done an exceptional job. He has put up the largest solid fence that's allowed, which is a 6-foot fence. In addition to that, he has added 6 full-size maple trees, and that was some years ago, 5 years ago. At this point, I actually did go out to the property unannounced to see for myself what the business did, what land was in question. And at that point, Mr. Sloan was nice enough to walk me around his property. When we got to the back, you couldn't see the houses when I was standing in the back of the property. You could not see the houses unless you were standing to the left or right of this man's property. So I think he's gone above and beyond in planting these trees in addition to putting up the fence. Now, it's not ideal. I don't think you're ever going to have an ideal situation, but it shows good faith in my opinion. The other point that I think is important is that when I went out there, all of Mr. Sloan's equipment was stacked right up to the line. He's got a utility pole that kind of marks the corner of his lot where his commercial lot ends and where his He owns it where his residential property starts. You know, I went out there and he was adhering to everything that he was supposed to in terms of his zoning. He had all of his equipment stacked right up to the line, but not one piece was parked on it. So to me, that shows that he was adhering to at least what he was allowed to do at this point. Now, one of the things that was noted in his application, one of the things that was noted during the commission hearing, was that by granting this permitted use of parking, this would actually allow for a reduction. Now, I'm not saying you're going to make the noise go away, but an actual reduction in the costs. And at first, I didn't quite understand it, but when I went out there, I got a better idea. Mr. Sloan is in the equipment rental business, and he has, you name it, he has bobcats and tractors and augers and a whole bunch of stuff. And right now he's cramped for space. And on the space, on his commercial lot, he has equipment that can be managed by hand. So he has these big, giant augers. They look like giant drill bits that are anywhere from 50 pounds to 200 pounds. And he's got some trailers that are flatbed trailers that can be moved around by hand, buckets that fit onto the end of these bobcats. Anyway, he is cramped for space, and all of his equipment not only shares that space, but his employee parking shares that space. So the intent would be that if he actually can be granted permission to turn this last lot into a parking lot, it will allow his employees to park there. In this case, his application called for 2 to 3 cars being parked there. In addition, all of that smaller equipment that can be carried by hand, and this is part of the condition, could be moved and stored on that property. Not only that, only the equipment that can be carried by hand, non-motorized vehicles, would be allowed to be stored or removed from that property. So in effect, where right now, if he wants to rent out a bobcat with a certain bucket attachment and it's 3 deep on the property, he has to actually move 2 buckets to get to the one that he needs, pull that out, and then replace the 2 buckets. He has an inefficient system. Efficient in the size of the property he has. This will allow him to spread out his inventory, not move as much equipment as required when he actually has a rental. So his projection now, we'll see, but his projection is that it will actually reduce noise. Certainly is the opinion of the committee that met, that it will not increase. The commercial noise will not increase with this granting of this conditional use. In addition, the last thing I would point out is that the other piece of property, the sister piece of property, which backs up to 1015, was granted this same condition. And on their property, they don't actually have 3 or 4 lots parking spaces. They have 10 to 14 parking spaces permitted. So the committee felt that the application met the standards for conditional use, and I hope you support it.
Thank you, Alderman Morley. Any other discussion? Alderman Mulliner.
Yeah, this is a tremendous business that we have on the south end of town. This is a situation that's kind of one of those rare occasions when it's a very difficult position to put the aldermen who live in that area, at least myself, into a box, because I support economic development wholeheartedly, and I think this is an opportunity to do so. However, at the same time, this is one of the rare occasions where C3 backs up directly to residential zoning, and it makes it a situation where it's very difficult to try to balance these things off. I think we have something that looks like a compromise here, but it's something that, in my mind, we've come forward. You know, we were talking earlier, I think this has been going on for 8 or 10 years now, it seems like, where we have a piece of property which was originally basically facing Riverside Drive. The back lot was sold off to the C3. Unfortunately, what should have happened at that time was they should have, the city should have made the change and gotten it to C3 if it was going to be a C3 zoning. And if it were me purchasing the property, I wouldn't have purchased it without that C3 zoning. I would have said that's the condition of the purchase. I have neighbors that live on that block, constituents that live on that block. They're very concerned about it. I'm concerned about it. This is a very unique type business. Most of the other businesses, with the exception of the contractor, who basically is a contractor who parks cars there, are small businesses that are doing office-type businesses. They're not the type of business that's doing this type of rental. I think Mr. Sloan's got a great business going. This is a situation where I don't see how he can realistically get the things in and out of the lot that he needs to without moving things in the morning, without making more noise in the morning to get the cars back there. You know, I have to say that, you know, this was also brought before us before. It failed before. It was slightly different. It wasn't the same request. There's no question. It was a different request. But I still can't support this concept because I just see this as something where I know he's a good neighbor. I know he's done a great job fixing up the area. I just see this as something that's just going to cause more problems in that area, and I do not support this in any way. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Pezin, I'll go to Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I was aware of this from the past just because I had attended several zoning commission hearings as a resident when this was occurring, and it started in 2002, and just some history is 02, 04, 05, 06, 08. When it was denied in 06, the applicant then in November of 08 had in the circuit court a judgment against him in favor of the city by Judge Popejoy, as the resident mentioned, and that really means a lot to me. If a circuit court judge voted in favor of the city of Elmhurst's decision and supported that, who am I to overrule Judge Popejoy to begin with? There was a threat to appeal, then that was dropped. I'd like to know how much that original lawsuit cost the taxpayers when it was fought in the first place. That was a burden upon the taxpayers that probably was unnecessary. My other question is, if this were to pass, how would we police this? It's great that what we're hearing is that this is what will happen and how this will happen, but if something changes and perhaps that is not what is in place, we'll be getting calls from neighbors, rightly so, and what do we do then? Our police, our code enforcement, more tax dollars at work for something that could have been avoided. I also am not sure what these non-motor vehicles are. Do they give off fumes? I know the neighbors are concerned about the pollution aspect. Do they leak gasoline? I'm not sure what those non-motorized vehicles are, plus the actual vehicles. Is this setting a precedence? Once we give away something like this, I've seen it happen before, it sets a precedence, and the next guy wants to come and do something similar, and those neighbors will be affected. I looked at the zoning commission information. There were 4 yes, 2 no, and 3 absent. And from what I was told from one of the zoning commissioners, the 3 that were absent had voted no in the past. Had they been there, would it have been 5-4? I'm not sure. I guess we'll never know. Also in the transcripts from July, page 99, Commissioner Brinkmeyer specifically asked the applicant, what is so different about this request from all the past and from what was before Judge Popejoy? And his response basically admitted there really was no difference, that he just felt he had been wronged and he was not given a fair shake. Once again, if a circuit court judge makes a decision, I would like to think that that was your fair shake. And I would also hate to see if this were approved and it did become a problem and an issue with the neighbors, could or would the neighbors come then to the city and sue the city on the opposite end? And how would we uphold our decision when Judge Popejoy defended us the first time for saying no? So I think I still have too many issues with this, and I agree with Alderman Mulner. I cannot support this.
Thank you, Alderman Pezza. Alderman Nybo, and I'll go to Alderman Brown.
I wasn't planning on speaking on this petition. I support the petition, but to fill Alderman Pezza in on a little bit of the history here, I supported our decision to litigate this case and defend our zoning decision, original one, even though I was not a participant in that decision. And the reason is because I believe it's within our prerogative to make a decision on this. And I thought it was important for us to defend that position. Whatever our decision is, right or wrong, we should be willing to defend it. Now, there's a precedent that we don't want to set, is when we make a zoning decision and someone sues us, that we somehow back down and decide, okay, well, maybe we'll give them what they want. In terms of history, then, does Judge Popejoy's decision make any bearing on our decision tonight? No. Petitioner is certainly within his right to come back before us again, present facts, discuss the legal standards, and it's up for us to make that decision. We certainly shouldn't punt and say, well, because Judge Popejoy says this, here's the way we should come out. We should independently and on our own examine the facts and come to our own decision. So I think the petition warrants approval on the merits, and I think the fact that there's a prior history on this, a legal history, should have no bearing on our decision.
Alderman Nybo, Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, Alderman Pezza already recapped, even though she wasn't an elected official at that time, recapped the history of it, and that was one of the main points I wanted to make here, is that I agree that the Sloan business, the CE Rentals, is a very good one. It is contributed to the city of Elmhurst. But in that regard, in the previous times that this did come before City Council, at that time it was denied for various reasons. I was one that did not go with the petitioner in the past, and my stance actually stands here tonight. I think the big thing here, there's a few things mentioned, these augers, these buckets that are being proposed in this recommendation to be stored on this additional parcel. I find it hard to believe that a bucket would be carried by hand per se. You're going to have to take some type of motorized vehicle back there to pick it up. These augers that are 200 pounds, I don't know, I'm not as strong as I used to be, I guess, but I'm not going to be going back there and lifting them to put them back there and lifting them back to avoid the transfer of mechanical equipment back and forth in that area. The back parcel that was referred to as a wasteland to date, I did visit it when the last time the petitioner came to the City Council. I would consider it currently a noise buffer. Our current Public Works Department, we as a City Council elected to have a noise buffer around that facility due to the same reason, concerns for the residents and any increase in noise that might occur from, in that case, a Public Works facility, in this case, a rental business. So I hate to say it because I do know that this does pin the petitioner back from the get-go, but I don't support this for those reasons. I have to err on the side of caution, and that side of caution is really to protect the residents. And I think by leaving it the way it is, I can't support the recommendation as it is today. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Brown. Any others? Alderman Rose.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to first say that I did not sign this report because I did not attend that committee meeting. However, I attended many committee meetings in the past at which this was discussed. And I'd like to clarify the history a little bit because it's not quite as simple as it appears. When this first came to the council, one of the oddities of our system is that we continue to operate during the month of August. As you know, what occurred was at that point the full committee agreed to this variance. It came to the city council meeting. We had a quorum, but we had nowhere near a full council. And what we thought was going to pass did not pass. So let me just say that it's not a simple black and white. I also want to support what Alderman Nybo is saying, and my understanding is the judge in this case did not necessarily judge on the rightness or wrongness of our final decision, but on the process of the decision. So that's really what Judge Popejoy decided on not was it a good decision or not, but did we follow our own rules with that, and that is indeed what he said. In terms of policing, a conditional use, we police like we do anything. If someone does not support, if someone does not continue to act according to the guidelines of the conditional use, we always have the ability, we pull the conditional use permit. It's not, it's not as if it's in perpetuity. It is conditional, and it's conditional upon those conditions being met by the petitioner. So this occurs in every conditional use that we have, and that's always a concern, how are we going to police it? It's very simple. We have the most power in this that we have for anything, which is we can pull that permit. I would like to say that I think one of the things that this particular case shows is the whole issue shows what happens when you engage in what I'm going to call poor zoning practices, and that's exactly what this is. I think this is a fairly complicated case. This is a residential partial, thank you, parcel. I'm like tongue-tied on this one. Really was allowed to remain as it was. It was not rezoned when it should have been rezoned. Well, who cares about that? That's the past, you could say. The past is very important in this case for this reason, is that what we had when the developer came in and set up these 4 lots, he left a piece of land that is landlocked. And that's probably the most important thing in this, which is it becomes, in essence, worthless, is what had happened. And what it does, I would challenge Alderman Bram on this, as a buffer zone, what it means is that the person now who owns, in essence, a worthless piece of property, they're paying for it to be a buffer. They're paying for that. It allows residents to use it without paying for it. And it really puts the economic burden on the person who now owns it. It creates a parcel that has no possible use by the owner. It's poor zoning practice, and if we allow it to continue at this point, the problem's only going to get worse. What I would say is that the precedent that we were talking about has already been set, and thus we have someone coming in saying, gave it to this guy, why don't you give it to me? And that's a really good question. Why don't we give it to this guy? I would say this. I've always said that anytime commercial property abuts residential, it is the onus to be a, quote, good neighbor is on the commercial property, the owner. That's the one who's got to be the good neighbor. It's very clear the types of items that are to be stored here, it's not all storage, it's parking, are really more passive in use. There's no motorized equipment. And I want to say this, that this is not a business that's going to be operating at 10 o'clock at night, at 11 o'clock, at midnight when you hear that beep, beep, beep. This is a business that will operate during business hours. No noise before 7 a.m. I'll tell you, I would love that would operate with my neighbor who loves to mow their lawn early on a Sunday morning at 6 a.m. I suppose I could call the cops and say, could you get my neighbor to shut up? That's not going to happen either. This is a business day. The business hours here are, I'm assuming 7 to 5. I believe that is correct. So when we're talking about creating noise, we're not talking about creating noise on a pleasant Sunday morning. We're not talking about creating noise on a peaceful Saturday afternoon. We're talking about a business creating, quote, noise that is not above a decibel level that we consider to be legal at all during business hours. Most people are up by 7 o'clock in the morning. I got to tell you, I'm not up by 7 o'clock on Saturday or Sunday, but it's a business day. That's when this time is. I think this owner, again, has gone above and beyond what we would expect. He's put a fence, he's put trees. I believe that he has done what he can and what I think is reasonable to do under positive zoning practices, and I support this, and I think it's a good use of conditional use permit. If for some reason this owner does not keep to these conditions, any resident can make a phone call, we can send city inspectors out there, and we can say your conditional use permit is up, it's gone. That's how a conditional use permit operates. Thank you.
Very well done, Alderman Rose. I appreciate the clarifications on a lot of these issues, and it's a great discussion we're having both ways here. Any other discussion before I ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll? Alderman Brown.
Yes, thank you. I do agree with Alderman Rose. There is a precedent that has been set, and that's the neighboring property. The precedence, though, is for automobile parking only and no other type of equipment on that neighboring property. And I'm hesitant on this because I think, I'm not sure if I actually want to move forward with this. I'd like to actually make a motion to amend this recommendation to restrict this to employee automobile parking only. And I think that's a fair compromise. Therefore, we're not, there's no potential of seeing any equipment, heavy equipment or medium-sized equipment on this property. There would be a clear path to get to this parking lot. It would be only for employee parking only, and I think it's a win-win for both parties involved. So, again, I'd like to make the motion to amend to restrict this as conditional use for employee parking only.
All right. Anybody else?
Do you have a second?
There's no second, so.
That's it. It dies.
Right, dies for lack of a second motion. Any other discussion before I ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps I missed this, but I know we've talked about the fact that this property didn't get rezoned in the past. Has it come up for rezoning recently? Why is this still R2? Why have we not attempted to rezone this piece of property commercial?
Alderman Morley, I'll have
The city didn't, at the time when we allowed for redrawing of the lot lines, that was our opportunity to do so. The recommendation was to do so, but we didn't. It left the burden of rezoning on the applicant, who did attempt to rezone but was denied. That's where it sits right now.
Could you just give me a little bit more background on that? Was that the last attempt by this applicant was to rezone this property so that he could use it?
I think it was 2 attempts ago.
And so instead of attempting the rezoning, he's asking for conditional use. Is that
Yes.
the substance of the difference? Because frankly, I do remember a little bit about this. I sat on the Development Planning and Zoning Committee, and we did discuss this at one point. So
He initially asked to rezone, and when that failed, he wanted conditional use with, I believe, motorized equipment, and then the zoning commission amended their recommendation. So his application was for parking and motorized vehicle. The zoning commission amended their recommendation to say parking with non-mechanical equipment. That was what was denied, but that was not part of his original his initial application. This is a brand new application, which is permitted, which is one of the things that we discussed initially was history, and is he allowed to actually resubmit? And he is, and that's what we're discussing here tonight.
Alderman Rose.
If I could clarify, because I do remember this as well, I think part of the issue is this attempt to not do spot zoning. Since it was not rezoned, I think what you've got now, then you're going to have this other little piece that's left here residential, and that owner's got to agree to rezoning too. So, I mean, I think that was the attempt, but it leaves this thing, it leaves it landlocked and kind of, just languishing and sitting there.
Alderman Nybo?
If I can just make a brief point on that conversation that just took place. This is a great example, I believe, in my opinion, where conditional uses are more advantageous to residential neighborhoods than rezoning. If the applicant were to get this property rezoned, then forget about any of the restrictions in terms of non-motorized vehicles or how many cars can be back there or whatever. With a conditional use, we can set the conditions that allows the applicant to use this property in a way that benefits, that is most beneficial to the neighbors that are right next door. And so I think we've seen a couple of these situations, at least since I've been on the council, where conditional uses are a more advantageous tool for those particular areas where you have residential neighborhoods butting up against commercial or industrial uses. So I think this is a great illustration. I applaud the petitioner for moving on the conditional use route rather than the rezoning route, because I think it ultimately betters the entire neighborhood. So, and that was a good question.
Very good. Anybody else for discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Morley.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Gutenkopf.
Aye.
Pezza.
No.
Shea.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Graham.
No.
Pipskin.
Aye.
York.
Aye.
Nybo.
Aye.
Healy.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Mullenor.
No.
Wagner.
No.
10 ayes, 4 nays.
10 ayes, 4 nays. The motion does carry, and that report is passed. Next on the agenda is item 7, reports and recommendations of appointed elected officials. Updates on the first item would be discussion on the mayoral task force recommendations, which were last week. Just want to mention once again, I think Chairman Diamond and Chairman Levin and the 22 additional community members that put forth many, many hours. I believe we had 6 or 7 CPAs, 5 or 6 MBAs. We had seniors, we had Northsiders, Southsiders, a nice cross-section of our community delve into our predicament of budget for next year. And made some recommendations to us last week. So we've had about a week to digest some of those recommendations, and at this point, if there's any discussion on them, this will be an ongoing discussion I'm sure we'll be having up until December 7th, when we have to make the really tough calls. But I'd just like to open up discussion for the task force and recommendations and what people thought of them, if people have any suggestions or questions upon staff, et cetera. Anybody? Okay. Alderman Mullen.
Yeah, I just kind of want to make a couple of statements and just a couple of comments about this. I think we've all gone through this a number of times, so we all know what's in it. I think it's an excellent report. My concern is in the area where we get into the public works area, and I'm very concerned about how deep the cuts are in that area. One of the things, and I said this the last time, and I want to just reiterate this, that I really think that this is going to be a great tool for us as we're building our budget, but I think the other piece that we really have to make sure that, especially the new aldermen who haven't been here before, really need to have an opportunity to look at is, if you haven't seen it, the citizen survey. And I think you need to look at the citizen survey, not just the most recent past one, but the 2 or 3 before that, because you'll see some changes in the way that the citizens were responding to the different items that are on it and how things changed in it. And I think it's important for us to respond to those changes that we see, because that gives us a cross-section not just of these 25 people who have really gone in depth on the budget, but it also gives us close to 700 people from the city who are citizens that we respond to. And what you'll notice is that some of the things in the public works area began to slide in the last survey, and the reason that they began to slide was because we had to start making cuts in those areas. So I really think that it's really important for us to really look at that and take that into account as we're looking at this budget as well. So please, if you don't have a copy of that, talk to Mr. Borchard and get copies of the last couple of them, not just the last one, so you can see the changes that have occurred. Like I said, I think this is an excellent report. I think it's a great stepping off stone, but I think we really have to look seriously at where we're at, and especially that public works area, because I think that there's some issues there that we really need to address. I'll just use street sweeping as an example. Street sweeping, if we don't clean the streets and we don't get the leaves off the streets, they fill the sewers, and now we have sewers that back up, then we're flooding. So, just basic things like that. So we really have to focus on the big picture. And I'm not an engineer, so I don't understand all of these things, but I have to rely on those people who are out there on the streets, making things happen and telling us this is what we need in order to do our job, so that we don't have repercussions that are bigger than we really think they could be. So
That's a great point, Alderman Mulliner. And being penny wise and dollar foolish, I remember when I ran for office, and I got a phone call at 10 o'clock, and a lady on Jackson and Mitchell called me. She goes, "I want you to come out and see this." And the water was actually going over her sidewalk into her recessed driveway. And the public works guys are out there undoing the, you know, the leaves and the sewers, and the grates, actually, the catch basins. And the street sweeping is huge. And we have some weaknesses in this town, and a lot of it can be prevented with preventative maintenance, simple things like that. And the few pennies it costs to do that save thousands of dollars and back up a drain issues and flooded basements, et cetera. So it's a very good point. I actually want to see that survey as well, too, because that's important, I think, for a lot of us new people up here. Alderman DeLeader?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to second Alderman Mulliner's remarks. I feel exactly the same way. The city is all about the health, welfare, and safety of its citizens. And at the heart of that are the police, the fire, and public works. And nothing will strike at the values of our homes as much as draconian cuts in public works. And I would consider some of these recommendations as very close to draconian. I will say again, and to Alderman Mulliner's point, which I totally agree with, again, this was an excellent report. But ultimately, the buck is going to stop here with the 14 and perhaps the 15 of us. And so what is at stake here may be literally the future of Elmhurst. And we really have to be at our best. We have to act not as politicians, but as statesmen, and do the right thing here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Alderman Leader. Very well said. Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the things that I struggle with reading this task force report is the fact that the task force had a relatively short amount of time. So one of the solutions that I see they took was to look at individual budget items and look for specific line items that they could cut from the budget. Some of these particular line items are personnel. Let's just eliminate an entire position. That cuts out a set amount of money. Something I think we did very well last year was to give the city manager specific direction on a total dollar amount and leave it to the discretion of the city manager how he was going to achieve that. I don't presume to know how each individual department runs in specific underneath its department head. And I'd like for the tenor of our discussion to reflect that as well, that perhaps when we're trying to achieve these same goals, the people that know best where some of these cuts can be made are going to be the department heads in these individual departments. I'm very concerned about the number of staff, and perhaps we ought to be looking at salary reductions across the board that will enable us to keep employees or keep particular positions that we've identified as really key. We've eliminated open positions. Most of those positions are open because last year we gave the staff a directive not to fill them, not because they're unimportant. I got the sense that the task force, and some of the language they used, felt that the positions were open because they were unimportant, and that certainly isn't the case. So I think we need to be very careful about accepting those recommendations because I think they're based on a false premise that these positions are open because we don't need them, therefore we can eliminate them, and that's not true. We've talked about the IT position so far. It's one example, but there are several others. And I look at other communities reducing senior management salaries as a temporary measure to keep the budget in place. My own organization is talking about senior management taking different pay adjustments from employees, and those are the places where we might have more leeway.
Thank you, Alderman. And you're right, these cuts are not written in stone, and ultimately, we, along with staff, have to make the decision, if we are going to cut, what do we cut, what do we prioritize? You know, I'd also like to see, you know, if we are going to take the recommendation and do a small increase on taxes, what if we want to really deliver the whole package? Is it going to be an extra $30? because the people, I'd hate to have to raise and then still cut. And if it's only going to be a few dollars more, I like to deliver, because people move to this town because they want service. They want quality, they want public safety, they want their streets paved, they want their sidewalks redone. All the tree programs, we moved there for the trees. My mother loved Oak Park and thought Elmhurst was very similar, tree-lined streets, and here we cut tree programs, you know. So I really would like to push to have a lot of these services put it back in place. So, because I think the calls that we get are not cut. They're like, we want more, and we want it faster, we want better. So I'd also ask staff to see what would it cost us in addition to keep what we're looking to cut as well, too. And then we have to make a decision as a group what we feel comfortable with. So, Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a request, a point, and then I guess a concern. The request I would have is, it's mentioned in the report, and I've heard it mentioned around town, that Elmhurst has the second lowest municipal property tax rate of the 34 cities in DuPage. I'd like to know or see if that's an apples-to-apples comparison to all of the other cities. For example, we have a different levy for the library. We have a different levy for the Park District. I know there are some communities in DuPage that have the Park District levy as part of the municipal levy. I'd like to see where those communities are at, and then once we have that, where do we fall in line? I don't know that that's completely relevant, but I think it's important given that many people say, well, we've got the second lowest tax rate, and that's great, that's a good thing, but is it truly apples to apples to everybody that we're hiring against? That's the request. The point I'd like to make is, and you have to commend the people on the task force. They volunteered for a near impossible job. Either cut services, and we've heard from some folks that have a problem with different services, whether it's the historical foundation or public works, and I certainly agree that some of them seem deep, but we also didn't give them the full picture, if you will. They looked at the operating budget, and there's another piece of the budget that is potentially in play, and I think we as a council have to address, and that's a capital expenditure. And the CIP fund, the 5-year expenditure, that's, if we're going to deal with this problem, I think we got to look at the whole picture and not just the operating fund. So as I'll move through this, and as I am going to go through this, I'm going to say, are there things in the capital expenditure plan that can wait, that can be postponed? You know, they addressed it a little bit. There was a tidbit managed here or there, or excuse me, mentioned here and there in the report, but I think we certainly need to take that into account. And then the last thing I'll say, and this is, I guess more of a, I think warning is the wrong word, but for every action, there's a reaction. So if I don't like that the report suggested we cut paving city roads from 5 miles to 4 miles, and I don't, there's a cost to that. And if we put that 5th mile in, or we choose to keep that 5th mile in, what are we going to take from? So I think it's my responsibility, if I'm going to suggest that we put money back into public works, where's the counteraction coming from? Is it coming in increased revenue, raise taxes, or are we going to cut from something else? So I think that's important, because I think every one of us, if we asked, if we all stood up and said, what's something you like or don't like about the report, I think every one of us would find something we don't like in the report. Or we're going to do something we don't like in 2 months. But if we're going to suggest we have to save something, there has to be an offset. Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman. That's a very good point. You mentioned the Historical Museum. I looked at the DuPage transportation, which was going to be cut. And having a father that was on dialysis for 3 years and at the end couldn't drive, that was transportation was a huge thing, and we couldn't, there were 7 of us, but we're all working, and it's tough to get to your parents, and everybody tried to pitch in, but transportation was an issue at the end, and I look at the seniors out there, and how do I cut a senior program like that when they might not have family, or the family is busy, So these are tough things that we have. That's why we're in the hot seat. We have to really, look at these needs and make sure we meet them. So, Alderman Nybo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since there's no specific proposals in front of us right now, I'm going to refrain from opining on that. But an observation I did want to make to follow up on the point I made before about the funds that we use, or the formulas that we use to distribute revenue to various funds. You know, the flip side of that as well is the general fund is running what we believe to be a $6 million deficit. And so, you know, one way we could tackle it is to increase the revenue. Another way we could tackle it is to reallocate the formulas. Or we could take expenditures that are in the general fund right now and see if we could pay them through separate funds. The material that the city handed out tonight includes a general description of some of these funds, and just glancing over them, I'm familiar with nearly all of them, but reading the descriptions a little bit more thoroughly, you know, for example, motor fuel tax fund can be used to provide funding for any projects in connection with street maintenance and improvement. The municipal utility fund can be expended to provide services in connection with water distribution, services or capital outlays. Parking system revenue fund can be used for any services in connection with collecting parking. So if we send a part-time police officer out there to ticket people who are parking improperly, we can actually pay for that service and that work, as I understand this, through the parking system revenue fund. Stormwater fund, same thing, but with stormwater issues. So maybe an avenue that we can use to narrow the budget deficit in the general fund, and that's the critical issue that we're facing, is we've got a $6 million deficit in our most important funds, one of our most important funds, the general fund. And there could be several different ways to tackle that, but maybe we really need to push the envelope a little bit more in terms of the outlays that we're currently allocating to the general fund, and see if we can really move those off to other funds. And again, because maybe the parking fund is not running anywhere near a $6 million deficit. You know, maybe the revenue sources that's supporting the parking fund is actually pretty strong, and maybe its deficit, you know, is a smaller percentage of its total budget than the percentage that we currently see in the general fund right now. So that's something that I think we really need to explore, is look at each of these funds and see if we can take expenditures that we've already put in the general fund and reallocate them to some of these other funds that may be doing a little bit better in these tough economic times. Maybe these other funds are a little bit more solvent right now based on the revenue stream that goes into them.
Thanks, Alderman Nybo. I would say the only thing we have to be careful again is borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, because that's what's been done in the past, and unfortunately our reserves, a lot of this was done out of reserves. And the thing I like about the report is not only is it fixing the structural imbalance, but it's actually putting money back in the bank, which I think we really need to look at and do, so that we could build this council for the next council and the next council, and again, have a financially solvent city. So, Alderman Rose had her hand up.
Thank you. I appreciate Alderman Nybo's comments. Some of my reaction to that, I think, is probably pretty similar, that I think we would want to rely on our city staff in terms of is that good accounting? Where are we in terms of legal? I understand part of what you're saying, and I want to support what Alderman Gutenkopf is saying. I have some real concerns about the council itself starting to do line-by-line cuts. I think that's inconsistent with our form of government, which is a more professional form. So I think our job is to make the policy on this. I think we have to be careful about how we're going to do that. So I understand that. I do want to make a comment to Alderman Healy. There have been some other comparisons that have been done among communities around this that have incorporated some of those other variables you're discussing. In the end, Elmhurst is still low. It's not as low as the second lowest, but all of a sudden it becomes the fifth or sixth lowest, but it's still clearly on the low end. But there have been some other analyses that have looked at that and pulled in some other things on that. So I would like to say that I think that the report is well done. I think there was a concern that we have to, I suppose I'll go back to, you know, my dad used to say, this too shall pass. And I'm sure all of us are hoping that this financial straits passes sooner than later. But in the end, our responsibility is to think forward. It's to not just focus on today, but to focus on 5, 6, 7 years from now, so that if we pull from all this stuff, we want to be able to meet the needs that are going to be out there in 5 years, and this money just doesn't come out of a hat. We've got to be able to have these funds there. They've got a particular use. I don't know what all those needs are going to be, but I want to make really sure that in 5 years from now, if we have a real need, we've got the money to do that, and we don't start borrowing too much from other funds. I appreciate what Alderman Nybo is saying, but I think there's some danger in doing that too much as well, so thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Rose. City Manager Borchert, I'll go to Alderman Pezza. Alderman Pezza? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. This is a little bit off track, but Mayor, when you mentioned seniors, it kind of sparked my memory from something we discussed last week. And when it comes to seniors, I know no matter if we make cuts that affect them or raise taxes, it will affect them. And so I think part of our job as a council, no matter which way things go, it will have an effect, especially on seniors. And you had mentioned that seniors, get a tax freeze, but not all seniors qualify for the tax freeze. Not all seniors are aware of the tax freeze. So that made me think, part of our responsibility as we make cuts or, raise taxes, whatever that may be, is to also give an awareness, that goes along with that, especially like, for instance, with the seniors. If taxes go up, perhaps they don't know they could qualify for a senior freeze. So I think we need to also look at the bigger picture of the cause and effect this all will have, and if we can at least help people get past whatever decisions we make to help them out, I think it's something we should also look at. So
it's a very good point, Alderman Pezza, and just so the public knows, any senior household that earns less than $55,000 can qualify for a tax freeze. We have currently just under 1,000 homes in Elmhurst that are actually tax frozen. So that means that their EAVs are frozen at a far less number than the market value based on when the freeze went into effect. And that's why the effect of what a senior home would have would be far less than, say, the effect of any of us up here. So that's an important thing, and I think it's important that we communicate that. Maybe we can put that in our next newsletter as well, and also we've got a city clerk here that's very up on our senior transportation issues as well. I'm sure the tax freeze too. So we'll make sure that people are very, very aware that if they could take advantage, that they do. So, City Manager Borchert had a hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just some responses back to some of the questions that have been raised. Certainly the city staff can provide copies for the council of the citizen survey. However, if you would like to review it from the comfort of your home or from a computer system that's available to access the web, it is on the city's website under Government, City Manager, Citizen Survey. So, and all of the past citizen surveys are there along with some summaries. So that's available for the community off the website. Also on the website is the information relative to the comparison of the city and village property tax rates. I believe on a very careful apples-to-apples comparison. It's on the city website. We'll make copies of that again for simple handouts for the council, for the committee, the whole meeting next Monday. Not that city staff doesn't make errors, but Tom Trozine and Marilyn Gasson on this form of comparison of city-village property tax rates are very, very, very careful to be as accurate as possible, to do apples and apples, which I know is the point of Alderman Healy. On this summary sheet, the communities are listed that have parks and recreation, and those communities have been the parks and recreation portion of the tax bill excluded. That includes Glendale Heights, Villa Park, and Willowbrook. Certain communities actually roll into their tax levy the library. That has been removed in the case of Wheaton. Some communities have got other unusual circumstances. Those are noted. The big apples to apples is that many communities are a part of a fire protection service. They don't pay for their own fire protection through the village or the city. They pay a fire protection district. That's a big factor that changes the Elmhurst comparison in that Carroll Stream and Willowbrook don't actually levy a tax themselves, but they don't have a fire department. The fire department service they get is through a fire protection district. When you put that apples to apples, that fire protection district rate on it, that provides a rate that goes way above the Elmhurst rate. So that's apples to apples, and it's out there. We'll make more copies and hand them out in the Thursday packet for the council, so you've got it for the committee of the whole meeting next week. Relative to expectations from the staff relative to where the issue is before the community, again, city staff is looking for budget goals by the end of the month, by the end of October, to begin working on the actual budget, so the city staff can put on, as Alderman Gutenkopf has suggested, and I think Rose has seconded it, city staff is probably best to put together the details, the nuances of the line-by-line budget once there's an understanding of the big pieces, the big policy issues that should go into that budget. What are the goals, the expectations relative to service, and what are the resources relative to revenue? The tax levy that's going to fuel this coming 10-11 budget has to be filed through a process beginning the end of October, November, with a tax levy ordinance being then approved in December. So there's where the discussion from the council needs to focus my perspective and come to closure. What's the tax in dollars going to be that's going to fund the general fund? What are the expectations of service? And the city staff will do the best we can putting all those pieces together, identifying what we can do as projected and what maybe will be more tenuous to do. These are, you all understand, very moving, significantly moving parts on revenues and expenditures. And I think any questions, Alderman Nybel referred to a handout that was provided just at the dais this evening. Wanted the council to receive that. Didn't plan on speaking too much regarding it this evening, but would expect to comment, talk about it at the committee of the whole meeting next week, allowing you all a chance to review it. I think, again, there's some information on that that is telling, at least relative to the past practice of this community local government in attempting to be frugal, provide services, and provide a subsidy, if at all possible, and not levy maximum tax rates. You can see the history of the city of Elmhurst on tax rate as a percentage of the tax bill being as high as 15% in the 70s, but because of the ability to use the planning for the community, aggressive commercial sales, and subsidizing basically the general fund with sales tax and state income tax, the percentage of the tax bill has gone down from the city, and other sources of government delivery of services has gone up. At this point, with the task force has identified, the city no longer can actually afford to subsidize that general fund. It's a matter of paying for those services if we need to have those services continue, and I would be the first to say I think part of the value of the community is fundamentally propped up by the quality of those services. So citizen surveys on the web, the comparison of cities in DuPage County, tax rates is on the web. We've got some information that's been distributed tonight. We'll be understanding the mayor will call a committee of the whole meeting next week prior to committee meetings to talk further on it, and again allow the council to begin to focus on what is the financing going to fuel the budget and what expectations would you have as to service. Give us that. City staff will do the darndest we can to make it all work.
Thanks, City Manager. One thing you mentioned, and I was looking through the breakdown from 1976, which ironically was the year I moved to Elmhurst. Kind of dates me a little bit, to 2008. And to make it plain and simple, back in 1976, out of the city portion of our tax bill was 17.3%. Park was 6.92%, library 2.73%, and school district 55.03%. Today, we were at 5.27. We went from 17% down to 5.27. That's, if you look across, it's a steady decrease. And that's primarily because of economic development. Back in 1976, downtown Elmhurst was an empty bowling alley, you know, that was in need of revitalization. And in the 80s, it was TIFT, which was the initial impetus to spur redevelopment. And it was TIFT by, I believe, Mayor Quinn back in the 80s. So you know, we look at what economic development has done for this community. I know the task force, I see Mr. Diamond in the room here, made a big push for economic development for long-term sustainability. And I think that picture kind of states it all. The Park District is still at 5.92. They're actually down a little bit, probably because of new growth that we brought in over the last 20 years. Library 5.69 and school district 71.3%. So, you know, when we look at other municipalities, the city portion of the bucket is typically between 12 to 20%, which it was back in the 70s. We're down at 5.27%. So I think that's a really good indicator that all of us should be aware of, because I think it kind of paints the picture. So the other thing I wanted to mention was our union wages, because I know that came up. It was up in the papers. And staff, City Manager Borchert, Marilyn Gaston, Valerie Johnson, have done a great job with getting our police and firefighters and public works people to take virtually a 2% cut in their increase. And I think we have approval on all those union contracts, which I think is terrific. That was credited to not only staff, but to the employees for taking as much of a week unpaid to help us through this struggle. And we'll remember that when times get better. And we appreciate it right now because dollars are tight. So I want to give credit to the employees for rolling up and working with us, because it's important right now, as private industry is cutting, that public also realizes that they have to work with our budget as well too. Different structure, you know. Private industry, I know I'm in manufacturing, we're down, so we have less body need. In government, we don't ever have a need for less bodies because crime goes up, roads need to be paved, you know. So it's a little different in government than it is in private, but we still have to be business people up here too and watch the dollar. So I commend staff and labor for working with us. Alderman Gutenkopf.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is one other item that was in the task force report that I think is worthy of revisiting, and they did recommend an oversight committee to assist the city council. I think it's not the city council's role to nitpick each department's budget, but I do think it would be an important avenue for us to look at this oversight committee as a group that can do more research, provide us with some detailed information, and assist departments in looking for ways to cut waste. Other cities have implemented these kinds of committees and found great savings through them. So I think that's something we can't overlook, and it was a great idea, and I think moving forward with our budget discussions, this is something we should pursue aggressively.
It's a good point. My only concern is we've got about 6 weeks. So, and I remember actually listening to some of the discussions about possibly cutting crossing guards, and you know, it's tough when you've got public safety as a big issue. I saw a kid almost get hit and Jackson and Spring right in front of a crossing guard, and God forbid we didn't have a crossing guard there. So I agree to a degree, but we're really the oversight committee here. We're the ones that have to make the tough decisions. These people work their butts off to work on this report and made us some really good recommendations. I agree that maybe that they're here, they're following through, they're overseeing, but for them to make final recommendations, that's up to us. We got to take the bullet, we got to make the tough decisions, and we got to work with staff to do it. So.
May I have a follow-up?
Sure.
I'm not suggesting we abdicate our responsibility for decision-making. I'm suggesting that a committee can offer us recommendations. No one can make decisions make final decisions but us. An oversight committee can come to us with some very specific ideas by spending a lot more time. The finance task force perhaps struggled with the amount of time they had to come up with recommendations that they thought would be substantive. I think they did a phenomenal job of coming up with substantive ideas. They gave us some ideas about total dollar amounts we might be able to cut from department budgets. We leave it up to the departments to work on this. An oversight committee can work with the departments even after the budget's passed to make sure that waste is cut and that we're running as efficiently as we possibly can. That's what an oversight committee does. I don't think they make final decisions. That's certainly our role.
Absolutely. Very good. Anybody else? All right. One thing that too also was in our packet, which I thought was neat, was the what other communities are doing and negotiations that are being taken with labor. We see, some people say there should be zero negotiations for labor. The problem with union wages is that we've got unions to deal with when we have a process that doesn't give us a whole lot of room for negotiation if we have to go to a arbitrator. And if we go to an arbitrator, we basically have to say, okay, we want X or Y. And the arbitrator says it's going to be X or Y. There's no in between. So if we go in at 0 and they come in at 4, somebody's going to either get 0 or 4. More than likely, it's been going with labor. So we've been trying to negotiate in good faith without an arbitrator so that we just got a 2% cut. We're at 1.5% instead of 3.5%. Actually, in some cases, we went over 2%, I believe, according to the city manager board sheet, I think, with the police department. So, but these are reality numbers as to what other municipalities are actually settling at. We've got many 4s, many 3.5s, several 2s, and a very limited number of 0s. So it's kind of a gamble. If we go in at 0, we might end up with 4. So, and court costs, arbitration costs, et cetera. So I have to give credit to staff who have really, I think, worked well with labor here, and also to our labor, to commend them for rolling up and realizing that times are tough. So, anybody else? Okay. Next on the agenda is other business. At this time, is there any other business we'd like to discuss? I know we are going to end up adjourning into special session for some litigation at the end of this as well. Any announcements that anybody like to mention as well? I know Mrs. Brown mentioned that on November 7th, the Elmhurst Historical Museum is doing their annual gala, which is actually dedicated to the one-room schoolhouse. That's November 7th at Drury Lane. I would encourage all to attend. I believe we have over 300 people attending as we speak, which is terrific. God bless. We definitely have a community that supports the history and the culture of this town, and I think having 300 already booked, we'll probably end up hitting 4, knowing the people on that committee and task force, Kathy Jordan and Val Stewart. So, and I commend everybody for supporting and coming out to put money into a great cause, and this one-room schoolhouse is happening here shortly with Bensonville approving the annexation, coming along in that process as well too. So we've got a lot of, even though we've got tough times, we've got a lot of grants that have come through from Springfield. Representative Rebelletti was able to bring home some money, and we're getting things done. So the other thing I wanted to acknowledge was the passing of Alderman Rose's mother-in-law. And times are tough, but this family's had a tough time, and my prayers are with Alderman Rose and her husband, and so I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Alderman Pezza.
I just had a quick question for City Attorney Serino. Since going back to executive session was not posted on the agenda, procedurally, do we have to make a motion and vote to do this, or is it okay to just do it?
My recommendation is that there be a motion to adjourn to executive session, and that be roll called, and then we'd be fine.
We will take Mr. Storino's advice to heart here. It is for a motion to adjourn this executive session. Alderman Pezza, Alderman Wagner, roll call vote, please. Or can we do an aye? Can we do all in favor?
Because it's because we're adjourning to executive session, it's really a further executive session. I would ask to call the roll.
Okay, we'll call a roll.
Okay. Pezza, I'm sorry, I got distracted on the
Alderman
second.
Pezza, Alderman Wagner. Sorry about that.
I didn't hear.
Wagner,
okay.
second.
Pezza,
Aye.
Wagner,
Aye.
Gutenkopf,
Aye.
Shea,
Aye.
Leader,
Aye.
Rose,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Hipskin, he's absent, York,
Aye.
Nybo,
Point of order, Hipskind is not absent.
Aye.
oh,
He's here.
It's okay.
it was poorly. I'm sorry. Okay, Hipskin.
Aye.
York,
Aye.
Nybo, I guess he's absent. Healy,
Aye.
Morley, absent. Kennedy,
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
Okay, that's 12 ayes and 2 absent.
12 ayes, 2 absent. We are adjourned.